Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1500 hours. We're going to go ahead and start our county election webinar for county coordinators. This is Tim Sevison, Deputy Director at the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. I'll do a brief review of our agenda and then turn it over to Director Padfield for comments. So tonight we'll discuss a threat and cyber assessment from the PASIC. We'll also get an update from elections by the Department of State. We'll also then review our Commonwealth support plan, the timeline for the elections, the EOC organizational structure we'll be using, and the relationship with our area offices so the counties have good awareness of that. We'll also talk about any resource requests that we may get in for law enforcement and how we're going to work that through NESF 13 coordination. The SAS folks will discuss the reporting processes, EEI, CIRs, those types of things, as well as any outward-facing display products and knowledge management that we have. So we also did receive the questions in from counties, and at the end we'll discuss any specific questions that weren't addressed as part of our normal briefing. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Padfield.
All right, thanks a lot, Tim. For everybody that's on the WebEx or phoned in, first of all, thank you, obviously, for everything that you've done up to this point. This is a pretty complex time that we're dealing with. It's bad enough to have a global pandemic that we're seeing a resurgence on. Obviously, we have some concern for civil unrest in other areas of the state, and obviously the presidential election. So trying to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover is really key. I know our staff here has been significantly committed to all of those projects, and our ops tempo has remained relatively high and is continuing to crescendo as we work towards elections. So the real key to this is really making sure that we're sharing information, relevant information, and we have good coordination at all levels of government. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but ultimately, we should be able to work through what can be or probably will be or most likely will be a complex problem set. So that is going to affect, just as this pandemic, probably all 67 counties to some degree. So I appreciate everybody's hard work from the emergency management community, being able to stay on focus and on task. I know Tim alluded to this. We received a number of questions, and a lot of the questions can be answered with good coordination at the local level. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, if you need us to facilitate those coordination points to be able to get some of your questions answered, that's probably better than us answering it at our level and finding a different interpretation, or it's interpreted it maybe a little bit differently. So the best source of information is probably your local elections officials that you're dealing with in the county, and also your local law enforcement. And I know there's been a lot of work that has been done on behalf of PSP and a lot of the other state agencies to be able to get the right information to you, and there'll be follow-up as far as informational packets for you to be able to get better explanations on some of the things we may cover tonight. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Okay, thank you, Randy. We'll next move on to our PASIC update. I believe we have Ashley on from PASIC.
Everyone, my name is Ashley Bleacher. I'm an intelligence analyst here at the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Intelligence Center. I'm going to be providing you a threat briefing touching on physical threat concerns and cyber threat concerns. First, I want to thank you all for your time today. And before I jump in, I just want to emphasize the critical role that our local partnerships and resources play in helping us really identify the threats and protect the Commonwealth and our critical infrastructure. You all that are spread out at the local level are really poised to see what's going on in, in the community, and communicating what's occurring and what you're seeing in terms of suspicious activity and issues through your chains of communication and to us at PASIC, so that it gets to us here at the State Fusion Center is really critical. So thank you for your support and vigilance, and we really do appreciate your partnerships. So I'll start out the briefing by saying that the PASIC is not currently aware of any direct threats in Pennsylvania toward the election infrastructure, or election-related locations. However, our status in Pennsylvania as a swing state, recent incidents in other states, including Dropbox arsons in California and Massachusetts, and recent nationwide and local civil unrest highlight the vulnerabilities and the ongoing potential for an unannounced attack here in Pennsylvania. I'll first touch on physical threat concerns. We're not aware of any threats by groups targeting any specific geographic locations. However, the PASIC's aware of the potential of potential groups of concern on both sides of the spectrum engaging in online chatter. This chatter has been related to the ongoing civil unrest in Philadelphia as well as the election, and this is something that we're continuing to monitor. There's an increased chance of unqualified and uncertified individuals posing as poll watchers, which may serve to intimidate voters or disrupt the election process. This also increases the likelihood of those individuals causing a disruption at polling locations due to being denied poll watching access. This likelihood is amplified following comments made by President Trump regarding poll watchers being denied entry into a polling place in Philadelphia, as well as recent social media posts encouraging poll watching. Voter intimidation at polling locations may include blocking the entrance to polling location, demanding documentation from voters when none is actually required, the brazen and intimidating display of weapons, photographing or videotaping voters, and verbal and physical confrontation of voters and potential confrontation by poll watchers. While voters may deem an individual openly carrying a firearm as voter intimidation, 66 out of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania do allow citizens to openly carry unless we're exempt, such as schools or courthouses. Philadelphia is the one county with prohibitions on open carry. Civil unrest in Philadelphia, incited by the officer-involved shooting on Monday, remains active. The unrest has included violence against law enforcement officers, arson, vandalism, and the looting of multiple commercial businesses. We're continuing to monitor for activity today and through the election. We have not yet seen related events emerging throughout the rest of the state, but we're monitoring for signs of that additional activity as well, and any information that you all may have out in your local areas regarding events is greatly appreciated. We anticipate if the activity in Philadelphia continues, it does have potential to affect election activities next week. In Allegheny County, while there's no specific threat, just wanted to highlight that there are multiple controversial items in play that have been receiving some media and online attention that may increase its potential to be a flashpoint for activity. Some of those topics include the rescinding of the 29,000 ballots due to the printing error, a lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court to allow poll watchers at satellite election offices in the county, and 2 U.S. postal workers in the county that were accused of not delivering mail, one of those incidences involving a ballot application and political advertisements. I'm going to move on to touch on some cyber threats. The PASIC is not currently aware of any specific or direct cyber threats targeting Pennsylvania election infrastructure. However, a cyber attack or even the mere claim of a cyber compromise on election-related infrastructure does pose a threat to election results and the public's confidence in the electoral process. Attacks targeting state and local government networks, which are becoming increasingly prevalent, are of particular concern. Although not specifically connected to the election infrastructure, those types of compromised networks can disrupt emergency services and other critical functions touching the election. Cyber threat actors are actively looking for exploitable areas to compromise and will likely continue to target U.S. cyber infrastructure. An attack on pre-election systems, which are generally internet connected and have varying standards, this would be things like election websites, voter registration systems, things of that nature would likely have a broader impact than an attack on the actual physical secure voting machines, which are far more difficult to compromise, so they are more likely targets. The spread of misinformation and disinformation remains a concern. Threat actors, both foreign and domestic, continue to disseminate disinformation. This disinformation is designed to really influence voters' political stances and undermine the confidence in the electoral process and results. They're likely to spread disinformation or capitalize on solitary incidents to generate more widespread fear, confusion, and mistrust. Recently, we've seen online voter intimidation and disinformation incidents reported in multiple states, including Pennsylvania. Actors have obtained publicly available voter information and are using it to direct misinformation and intimidation toward voters. Recent incidents have included threatening emails originating from Iran and misinformation spread on social media around the ability for Pennsylvania early voters to change their votes at polling locations on Election Day. These types of misinformation and disinformation circulating on social media really have the potential to create confusion and disruption at the local level, regarding actual polling locations and what activities are permissible at polling locations on Election Day. We strongly encourage our local partners to maintain awareness of current events in Pennsylvania voting processes and to refer to trusted sources of information when verifying information yourselves, as well as when interacting with the public and sharing information. While not a cyber threat, just a note that any ongoing court battles at the federal, state, or local level are also likely to contribute to ongoing voter confusion. I know that was a lot of information, so just to recap, the PASIC is not currently aware of any direct threats in Pennsylvania toward the general election, infrastructure, or election-related locations, but we're continuing to monitor. Of note is the ongoing rhetoric by disinformation actors and extremist groups. Additionally, we anticipate the potential for voter intimidation and unrest at election-related locations leading up to, on, and following the election to be heightened based on the current political climate, recent nationwide and local civil unrest, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Pending any questions that anyone may have, that's all I have. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Actually, that was a very good and comprehensive brief. Just a reminder, we do have folks muted, so we aren't taking questions per se, but if you do have specific questions, if you forward them into SAS, we'll get them to Ashley and PASIC if you have any questions on that brief. Now we'll move on to Deputy Secretary Marks from the Pennsylvania Department of State for an election update.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Patfield. Thank you, Ashley, as well for that brief. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I just really briefly want to say thank you to our partners at PEMA. They've been an integral part of our election preparations. They helped us coordinate and distribute PPE out to all of our county election offices so that they could provide their poll workers with personal protective equipment and even voters, if necessary, with personal protective equipment at the polling place. They've also, of course, been really integral in standing up our election communications infrastructure. And likewise, we're very thankful for our partnership with the state police. The information they provide us regarding threats and potential threats is invaluable to us as we prepare and work with our county election officials to prepare for elections. I just to give you a sense of where voting is at in the where voting stands in the Commonwealth right now at this moment, and to kind of help you understand what we may see on Election Day, I want to share some quick stats with you. So voter registration in the Commonwealth reached a new high. We actually got topped 9 million. We're just almost at 9.1 million registered voters in the Commonwealth. Mail-in and absentee ballot applications topped 3 million, close to 3.1 million. And there may be some paper applications from yesterday's deadline that are still being entered by the counties. And of those, almost 2 million, or about 65% of the ballots have been returned to the counties. But that means there's roughly 1 million or 1.1 million ballots still out there that have yet to come in and back into the county boards of elections. We certainly expect that mail volume will be heavy between now and Election Day, and we expect as well that visits to drop-off locations, county election offices will continue between now and Election Day as large numbers of voters are returning their voted ballots. As I mentioned a moment ago, 5 o'clock p.m. last night was the deadline to apply for mail-in and absentee ballots. There is an emergency deadline for folks that have an emergency that will prevent them from voting. An emergency that occurs between yesterday's deadline and Election Day. But we're happy that 65% of the ballots have been returned, and we actually think the number is higher than that, and counties are just having trouble keeping up with the volume of mail that's coming in and recording them into our statewide voter registry. Kind of looking at historical turnout for presidential elections, even with 3 million, over 3 million absentee and mail-in ballots cast, we still expect a large number of voters, anywhere between 3 and 4 million, who may show up on election day as well. I've been through a number of presidential elections, and those of you who have been involved in any direct way, know that a presidential election cycle is unique for a whole lot of reasons. So, and one of them is just the activity in and around polling places on election day. So as we approach election day, I think it's important to know, what rules are in place at the polls on election day. I'm not going to go over all of those in detail. There is guidance posted on our website, and I don't know if PEMA may already be planning to distribute some of that, but certainly we can distribute it as well, or links to that information if you care to review it directly yourself. A couple of important points about election day voting. So polling place hours, for those of you who don't know, are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. But anyone who is in line at 8 p.m. Can vote. So, if a polling location has a line at 8 o'clock, they'll cut the line off. In most cases, they try to bring everyone inside the polling place so they can close the door. But if you are in line at 8 p.m. to vote, you are entitled to vote, and the polling place needs to allow voting to continue until all of those individuals who are in line have had their chance to cast their ballot. We've gotten a number of questions, not only from county election officials, but other folks as well, regarding the wearing of masks. We've been working with the Department of Health to update guidance, make sure that guidance is in line with the Department of Health and the CDC's guidance. But I think it's important to note we're talking about a constitutional right, the right to vote, and no voter can be turned away for not wearing a mask. I know different counties have handled this in different ways. You cannot turn someone away, but many counties are providing some alternative method or some alternative location within the polling place to sort of segregate that voter from other voters, so that voters don't feel under threat or in danger of contracting COVID-19. We are, however, urging voters to wear a mask for their own safety and as a courtesy to others. The counties do have the authority to mandate that the poll workers wear masks, and our understanding is that the overwhelming majority of counties, if not all counties, are doing that. I mentioned the PPE and the cleaning equipment that's going out to the polling places. So getting to the actual rules in and around polling places, aside from the question about masks, and in light of how passionate people are about the importance of this election, as they are with a lot of presidential elections, but this one has been uniquely challenging on a lot of fronts, COVID-19 being just one of them. But, we have a lot of new election reforms that were put in place just for this year. So we're expecting a lot of activity around polling places. And most of that is authorized by the election code. Campaigning outside of a 10-foot radius around the entry of a polling place is allowed. What's not allowed, of course, is voter intimidation. And Ashley from PASIC mentioned that, there is a threshold, and particularly as it relates to weapons, firearms, as she mentioned, 66 counties allow open carry. It is a right that is protected, in those 66 counties. But there's a line you cross between exercising your right to carry a firearm and using that firearm in a way that would intimidate voters. But there'll be campaign staff, large numbers of voters around polling places. While we're hoping for a peaceful, smooth, and safe voting experience for voters who are voting in person, we are preparing for the possibility that there will be problems at some polling locations. That may come in the form of long lines at peak hours that just get people upset and impatient, or it could be overt attempts to intimidate voters, or God forbid we have a large event, some social unrest that potentially prevents people from voting. Just so you understand how polling places are managed on election day, I want to provide a brief overview of who is in charge at an individual polling place and what is and isn't allowed in and around a polling place. The judge of elections is the person responsible for maintaining orderly voting at the polling place. The district election officials or the precinct election board is made up of a judge of elections and two inspectors of elections, one majority inspector and a minority inspector, and they're typically of two different political parties. But the judge of elections is the person in charge. And the judge of elections has the authority to call on a constable or a deputy constable or the police if necessary to restore peace. I did get sort of a heads up about one question that may come up, so I'm going to proactively answer that now regarding constables. Constables are actually required. There's a provision in the election code. Constables or their deputies are required to be present at polling places throughout voting on election day. So it is not unusual to see a constable there. And as I said, the judge of elections has the authority to call on them to maintain peace. Now, like everyone else at a polling place, there are limits to the constable's authority. Certainly, the constable cannot do anything that amounts to intimidation or voter suppression. They are there only as necessary and only if called upon to maintain peace or restore peace and order at the polling place. There's another group of individuals, and Ashley mentioned this as well. She alluded to it during her briefing, and those are poll watchers. And I want to make a clear distinction between poll watchers and people who are sort of self-appointed, who are, whether it's the rhetoric of a candidate or something they've read on social media, there is a process to become a duly authorized poll watcher. And that process involves being appointed by a political party or a candidate. And that appointment goes to the County Board of Elections, and the County Board of Elections has to provide the duly authorized poll watchers with credentials, with a certificate, basically a watcher certificate. And the poll watcher has to have that certificate on hand when they go to the polling place. That is the evidence that they would show to the local election officials that would indicate the poll watcher is entitled to be in the polling place during the process of voting, and even after voting as they're tabulating all the results and preparing the materials to be sent back to the county. Those individuals are entitled to be in the polling place. Someone who simply shows up at the polls to observe or watch or whatever they happen to be calling it, they certainly have a right to be present, but they have to stay outside of the 10-foot rule. Basically, they would be treated like campaign staff who are there campaigning for a particular political party or for a particular candidate. They have no more rights than those individuals, and they also have to abide by the same rules. They cannot block entry. They cannot engage in intimidation. They cannot attempt to suppress the vote. And any activity like that would in most cases be reported directly to the judge of elections. And again, the judge of elections has the authority to call on the constable if there's one present, or police if necessary to restore order at the polling place. Real quickly, I do want to go over just sort of what to expect as well on election night. Given the high volume of mail ballot applications and returned mail ballots, we expect vote counting to take some time. We believe the overwhelming majority of ballots will be counted within the few days right after Election Day, but it's certain that all ballots will not be counted on election night. We're working closely with the counties and have been for months to implement time-saving measures that were allowed in election legislation that was passed earlier this year, so that they can tabulate and report returns as quickly as possible on election night, and then proceeding in the days thereafter. We are hopeful. Our message to voters and to the media is to be patient. What's important is that votes are counted accurately. Not as important as counting them or more important than counting them quickly. But we understand that there may be, particularly if the election is close and the results here in Pennsylvania are meaningful, particularly in the context of who is elected president. We're asking people to be patient, but we're preparing for the event that, we are sort of in the crosshairs. Everyone's waiting on Pennsylvania, and people get impatient. So, it's not like we're going to be able to breathe a sigh of relief on the morning after Election Day. It is a process, and it's a process that will play out over multiple days, and we'll have to remain vigilant even in the days thereafter as counties are tabulating election results. Hopefully, there won't be any attempt to interfere with that process, but we don't know. So we're preparing as well for those days after Election Day. In the event that something occurs beyond the usual. We always expect that there may be litigation, and that's also part of the process, and we're certainly well prepared for that and have gone through that in past elections. But again, as I said, we can't all breathe a sigh of relief the morning after the election because ballots will still be counted, and because people may be waiting with bated breath on election returns from Pennsylvania. We want to remain vigilant in those days after Election Day as well. That's all I have, and pending any questions.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary Marks. And as I had mentioned before, the attendees are muted, so if they do have any questions related to Deputy Secretary Marks' presentation, please send them to the Situation Awareness Cell at the SAS inbox, and we'll get them routed appropriately. Okay, we'll now move into a review of the Commonwealth Support Plan. So we had drafted this in advance and routed it through staffing here and had it established on or about the 23rd of October. And this plan is a conceptual plan that was intended to get us from where we were at and looking at all of our planning assumptions, get us through the election window. And we'll cover down on that in a minute. Obviously, we've adapted this plan to the current situation with issues in Philadelphia and those types of things, through the IEP type of process every day. But this is still the conceptual plan that we're moving forward with. Sorry about that. So this is our general election timeline. We're here at the 28th October, and currently we're doing the webinar. We also elevated the CRCC to include certain of our ESFs for daylight operations. This primarily has to do with the civil unrest in Philadelphia. We've had our ESF 13 partners in for that. We had been planning on activating the CRCC no later than Monday, the 2nd of November, but as I said, we had to move that up. So as we move forward, we still have a decision point in for the 31st on whether or not we will go to 24 operations starting on Monday, but our planning assumption is we will be at 24-hour operations no later than Monday, the 2nd of November. And then we will continue with 24-hour operations. Right now, we're anticipating that through probably 8 December. And talking with a lot of our partners, you know, the announcement of the popular vote in Pennsylvania may be Friday, so that comes out based on what Deputy Secretary Marks had mentioned before on some of the challenges of counting the vote this time. So we want to be prepared for that entire period through Friday the 6th. And if the announcement is made on the 6th, then that creates tensions and unrest. We want to be prepared through the next weekend. And then you can see the rest of the timeline. We have some milestones dealing with the Electoral College and the counting of Electoral College votes and the announcement of the Electoral College victor, and then, of course, the inauguration day, which we are all involved in planning all through that entire period. Our strategic guidance that we were provided from the senior leadership in the Commonwealth is first and foremost that we would have the ability to effectively respond to intentional or unintentional acts or conditions that could disrupt the voting process. And that does include civil unrest and many of the things that Deputy Secretary Marks had mentioned. So we do have the Pennsylvania State Police, the Pennsylvania National Guard, and our other ESF 13 partners will be prepared and have resources ready to respond, you know, on that day, and as well as in advance of that day based on the things that we're dealing with in Philadelphia right now. As Deputy Secretary Marks had mentioned as well, you know, there are legal rights that folks have that we have to be responsive to. That includes the lawful protests that will go on regarding the elections, regarding the police-involved shooting in Philadelphia, regarding a variety of other things. There are legal means for doing observation that he mentioned, and these things can't be interrupted as well as folks' legal rights to carry and possess firearms where they are legal and appropriate. So again, we have to be responsive to those. We have to maintain situational awareness through the monitoring of leading indicators, and SAS will talk a lot about the EEIs and the things that we are looking at for leading indicators of potential problems so that we can anticipate any resource needs or issues that we're looking at in the field. Also, we have to be responsive to the collaborative decision-making process because as Deputy Secretary Marks had mentioned, you know, there are a couple of swim lanes of authorities that come into play here. The Secretary of State and that food chain or that swim lane has specific authorities within the EM community. We have our specific authorities. Pennsylvania State Police have their specific authorities, and National Guard have their specific authorities when we deal with these types of issues. So what we've developed out is a collaborative decision-making model that allows for input and respect for those legal authorities. And then lastly, we have to maintain continuity of our existing missions. As I think Director Padfield had mentioned at the beginning, you know, we still have COVID. We've got some severe weather that we're looking at the end of this week. We've got some civil unrest ongoing, and we've got a couple of other things that we're sort of managing. So we've got to maintain continuity of all of those activities as well. So we developed a three-phase plan. So phase one we're currently in, which is the pre-incident actions that we're taking. That was the development of our operational plan, the Commonwealth support plan. We also developed our decision support tools for executive leadership as well as the operational level, and that's both for deliberate decision-making as well as for crisis decision-making. And then we are currently working on the pre-deployment and staging of critical resources to be able to effectively respond quickly to incidents that arise throughout the Commonwealth. Phase two, which is our response phase, which we're looking currently at 3 and 4 November under this plan, will be fully staffed at 24-hour or 24/7. We'll be maintaining situational awareness at both the state and the county level and information sharing at both the state and the county level. And SAS will discuss those portals and whatnot. We'll also be conducting crisis decision-making at that time, as well as crisis planning for things that come up and we're presented with. We'll be deploying resources to counties as we receive requests and adjudicate them, and we'll also be sustaining those resources once they're in the field during that phase. If we need to stay operational after the 4th of November because there are issues with civil unrest and a variety of other things, we also anticipate that we may have to expand the emergency support functions that we have here in the CRCC. And that would be primarily due to potential impacts from civil unrest on the citizenry, where we might be concerned with feeding and sheltering and those types of things, as well as replenishing the existing folks that we have working in the field, whether it's state police or the National Guard or anyone else. So that would be beyond 4 November, and then we would reassess that as we move into that period. This is the organizational structure that we've developed for the CRCC. An op board came out earlier today, so we are at a lower level of activation than this, but by the 3rd of November, this will be our activation level. So first and foremost at the top is the relationship between the policy group, which is the executive level for the Department of State, FEMA, the National Guard, the Pennsylvania State Police, and the Governor's Office of Homeland Security, and the relationship with their departmental operations centers, primarily through the Pennsylvania State Police, the Pennsylvania National Guard, and the Department of State. So any critical decisions or crisis decision-making, as I mentioned before, with those discrete authorities of those entities, that will go to that policy group for crisis decision-making, and the information will come back down through the CRCC organization for dissemination, as well as operationally over to those 3 departmental operations centers. The dotted lines recognize the coordination between the departmental operations centers, or PSP, and then our PSP AREPs here in the CRCC, with the National Guard Joint Operations Center for Indiantown Gap, and our National Guard agency representatives here in the CRCC. And then with the Department of State, slightly different. The primary relationship there for coordination will be with the election cell that will be under the situation awareness section within the CRCC. That's the primary relationship there. We'll also have federal partners that will be here, primarily FEMA, the FBI, and CISA for cyber activities. Moving down into the RSS section, the only significant difference there to note is we have some gray shaded folks. So we do plan on having our primary ESF 13 resources here in the CRCC, but we have some gray shaded ESF 13 resources that if we engage law enforcement from the Game Commission or the Boat Commission, we'll bring them in. If we don't engage their resources, we wouldn't. And then that Human Services branch, which is primarily the Department of Human Services, that would be for phase 3 of the plan if we would need them primarily for feeding, sheltering, those types of things. You'll also notice a geographic branch within the RSS, and that's something new. We've tweaked the PRISM model, and that's primarily our area directors. So we've moved our area directors operationally under the RSS. So if we have operational issues that we're dealing with resourcing, with the need to do crisis planning, with something similar to that, the area offices will be coordinating with that respective county and the RSS to make sure we're fully integrated operationally. If you move over to the situational awareness section, you'll also notice that we have geographic LNOs. This is primarily for information flow up and down between the counties and the CRCC. So if it's information oriented, it will be through the LNO, which is an area office person to the respective county. If it is operationally oriented, it will be through the area office director for that geographic area, or the deputy director, and then working with the RSS section chief. So that essentially is the organization we're dealing with. We also do have a cell set up for feeding. There continue to be a significant amount of feeding operations and food distribution activities going on, and we're going to be monitoring that just to ensure that there are no significant impacts to feeding across the state if we get into civil unrest and these types of things. This is our operational rhythm. The main things to note there are, on this cycle, there's 2 areas for decision notification. So the first one comes from the morning. We'll have our normal staff huddles and briefs that we do. And then the senior state official will have received information from that policy level group in and around 9 o'clock in the morning. We anticipate that we will get any updated guidance from the morning by that time. If it is something that can be transmitted via email and whatnot, we'll work with the area offices to get that out to you. If it's something significant, we may look to have another webinar or a regionally based one with the area offices at that point in time. The next big area of decision making would be the executive update brief, which we'll run with our executive at 1700 hours. And if anything significant comes out of that, they're again in and around the 18 to 1900 time frame. we would look at either disseminating information from that or potentially having a webinar in the evening if it is something that's significant that we want to get everybody on the board. Although we don't have reoccurring webinars for the counties on here, we do anticipate that more than likely Monday, we will schedule a webinar, most likely in the mid-morning time frame, in that 10:30 time frame on Monday morning. We talked about the standard operating procedures that we have developed specific to this, to the CRCC. So the first one I want to talk about is the resource request adjudication process, which is on the left side of the screen as you're looking at it. So we recognize that resource requests can come in from a variety of means, although the preferred means is obviously WebEOC. It could also come in from a variety of means. So whether it comes in from WebEOC, or it's an email received, or it's embedded in a peers report, or it comes in on the HSIN dashboard, wherever it comes from, those will immediately go to the RSS chief. If it is law enforcement related, law enforcement resources, police, National Guard, riot control gear, those types of things, we will convene a coordination cell here in the CRCC, which will have the ESF 13 agency representatives on it, as well as the county emergency manager that requested it, and any of the local law enforcement for that area. So we won't really be working law enforcement specific requests strictly within the EMA food chain. We've got to have the law enforcement nexus involved with that in order for us to, really understand what the issues are. So the state police will also be working as the lead for that coordination group to look at the validity of the request, whether it's feasible, achievable, those types of things. And more than likely, they will, if the local troop or the area command for that area has not been in the loop on that, more than likely we'll bring them together there. So it behooves the counties, if you're looking at law enforcement related requests, to first work through your local law enforcement, up channel it through your troop, barracks, station, or area command, whatever level you're at, and try to get it resolved at that level before you submit a request to the CRCC. Because if we get that here at the CRCC, we're going to push right back down and convene that group before we make any decisions on it. So if it is something that can be tasked within the my authority as the incident support manager, we will task that out and then notify the policy group, and they'll have SA on it. If it's not, if it deals with a National Guard request or something similar to that, that will go to the policy group for a crisis decision to make sure that we're taking into account all of the nuanced things that involve the election, COVID, all those things with the use of law enforcement forces in and around this. Also for a crisis decision standard operating procedure, if we receive critical information reports, they also will go into that same sort of food chain. There again, if it comes in through a situation report, an email, open source peers, HSIN, regardless of where it comes from, that normally will come into the situation awareness cell. That'll come directly to me. I'll take a look at that. More than likely, I will channel that through the senior state official, and then to the policy group. And then we will also then look at it through the RSS group. And if it is law enforcement sensitive, it can potentially be sanitized and then put up to the SIG events board so folks have SA on it. But if it is law enforcement sensitive, it would not go to that. It would stay within the operations group and at the policy group for general information. Okay, moving on. We do want to give you an update on current operations from the Pennsylvania State Police as well as the Pennsylvania National Guard. So Sergeant Chris Ott from the Pennsylvania State Police.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sergeant Chris Ott, Pennsylvania State Police. I'm one of the A-reps currently here at the CRCC, and as Deputy Sevenson alluded to earlier, we will be activated during this time period, depending on whatever operation time frame is needed. So basically, just to start out with certain assumptions, I do want to stress what Deputy Sevenson said about communication at your level with your local county police to go through the areas, the respective jurisdictions where you're at. If that's establishing communication, coordination with the station commanders or area commanders, please do so. Some internal documents went out to those respective folks on our end to bring them up to speed. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, so kind of get everyone on the same string of music. The assumptions that are the local police are responsible for their jurisdiction and respective polling locations. Certainly the local police are aware to contact PSP. We can go direct for that for any particular assistance at that time. Of course, if the need is something further that can't be addressed at that level, certainly it can be bumped up here to PEMA. As well, PSP is responsible for our jurisdiction respective polling locations as well. Just to touch on some of our continuing lines of effort as far as the ongoing election security and civil unrest potential. You heard a representative from PASIC earlier. They have been very active in this preparation and continuing lines of effort of providing law enforcement intel briefs to all of our law enforcement partners across the state. That includes the PA DA's Association, PA Chiefs of Police Association, PA Sheriff's Association, along with federal partners of the FBI. I believe 3 to 4 of those briefs have been transmitted out already, with more coming. Very informational information that are provided in those. And in that also it provides current recommendations, best practices pertaining to election security that you've heard here today. We also, as an agency, have produced an internal document, which is law enforcement sensitive, but just to touch on some of the highlights of it. As mentioned earlier, it's distributed to all of our area, troop, and station commanders on information such as Title 25, which, if need be, through information that's gathered through these daily briefings, is updated and clarified and put out on a daily basis with morning briefings we have to those particular area troop and station commanders to keep them up to date on the most current information that's provided by all of our partners. We will also conduct domestic security checks leading up to the election of polling locations, and we have certain reporting templates and measures in place to update our Department Watch Center in a timely manner during the course of the election process. We also have a partial PSP IMT activation, which basically the current role now leading up to the election is to focus on manpower needs, personnel rosters from all of our bureaus, offices, along with the troops to get the most manpower we can in case of any needs that arise across the state. We're formulating those rosters hopefully to be in basically an east-west type deployment if needed. And working on equipment, vehicle needs, procurement, working with conjunction with our Director of Bureau of Staff Services. As we go through this process, if the need arises for a full INT activation, we have the capability to do that as well. Of course, in the evenings, we're doing executive level briefings and situational awareness sharing with all our executive level staff. We also will be on an elevated or modified alert status near and post-election date. Again, the contents of that law enforcement sensitive, but just rest assured all members will be uniformed and will be carrying riot gear moving forward. We will also have our tactical units, special teams needed available on an as-needed basis, and if available, coordination certainly occur at the local level or if it comes up through PEMA. I'm not going to really touch on the resource request procedure. I believe Deputy Simpson did a good job on that as far as how that comes in, how it's vetted, and the ESF 13 partners will all be together on a coordination call. If you were to submit one and it needs hashed out, we can do that. At this point, that's the highlights I have from this, unless anyone has any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sergeant Don. And again, if you do have questions, summarize them and send those into SAS and direct them to your PSP. We'll now move on to Colonel Brooks from the Pennsylvania National Guard.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Colonel Tim Brooks. The Pennsylvania National Guard is prepared to respond throughout the Commonwealth in support of our law enforcement and ESF 13 partners. Our planning continues, obviously, with the situation in the Southeast in Philadelphia. We're continuing to plan for any kind of deployment in and around the Commonwealth as a tiered response based on the current threat that's out there. We're aligned throughout the Commonwealth with our 3 geographical PTFs in the Northeast, the Southeast, and the West. We're ready to respond if any resource request comes in and are vetted through PEMA, and we look forward to supporting Pennsylvanians.
Thank you, sir. And there again, I know there were several questions regarding the National Guard and the questions that were pre-submitted, and they'll be handled basically the same as any other ESF 13 request. So, if it is a request for law enforcement support, tell us what you need, not that you need the National Guard, and we can look at sourcing the law enforcement request based on, the need that you have. Okay. Moving on then. So we're going to move now into knowledge management, and Mike Manley from SAS will moderate.
Good afternoon, this is Mike Manley, Situational Awareness Section Chief. We developed a knowledge management plan focused on understanding that this is potentially a 67 county event. So we had to have a focused plan that takes all that into account and creates some decision support tools that help support that. And a couple of those that we're going to display inside the CRCC are, weather, law enforcement type cameras, regional and national news networks. But we also have some internal GIS product dashboards that we've developed specifically to support this event. We're working with the state feeding task force to focus on feeding locations and impacts from potential things like demonstrations and or issues at polling locations, so we can identify them. We also have the HISN dashboard that's had some additional products developed with that. Melissa, would you like to talk about that?
Certainly. Good afternoon. This is Melissa Fry from PEMA and the operations of the election cell during this operational period. Many of you have previously engaged with the PA HISN election dashboard over the last 2 years, but for some of you, it might be the first time. We'll be issuing an email to you after this briefing that will include the HISN address to sign in and gain access, the naming convention for being on the board, and other relative information. You'll be required to request permission to enter the board and be approved by the board administrator due to the nature of the information being shared on the board. We will be adding information, files, and guidances over the coming days and as demand for the information sharing requires it. This is basically a resource for you to have real-time visibility of events and impacts that are related to the election and polling location, as well as being connected to and able to communicate when it comes to your decision-making and response. We will go through this operational period and through Election Day with the board being stood up. If you have any questions in regards to the HISN board or the information we're sharing there, you can either private message us at the election cell through the dashboard or use the email address that will be in this afternoon's email to reach the election cell. There'll also be a resource guide that will be emailed to you as well as being available on the PA HISN election dashboard. It will include key points of contact for county election officials or election offices, emergency management coordinators, and others. It'll have a handful of trusted sources for information, polling locations by county, and election-specific guidances as Department of State's Deputy Marks highlighted earlier. They will all be hyperlinks for easy accessibility. As far as the partners that are on the board, it includes federal, state, and local partners, FEMA, FBI, CISA, state agencies such as Department of State, PEMA, State Police, Department of Health, and county elections offices, county emergency management offices, and county CIOs. The information that is shared is from both the emergency management world as well as the election world. It covers real-time weather, roadway, cyber, identified or pre-scheduled demonstrations, protests, and rallies, as well as any civil unrest, polling location issues, to include but not limited to individual polling location threats, voter intimidation, or ballot issues, social media, or misinformation to long lines. They will also be designated regarding its regionality for national, statewide, county level, or precinct level. The hours of operation for the dashboard will be from today through Monday, November 2nd. It will be operational 24 hours a day, but will be staffed from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. When you are approved to access the board, you will be able to see the information. If you log off or sign off, you'll be required to request access again. Election Day on Tuesday the 3rd, the board will be operational and staffed from 6:30 in the morning through the early morning of Wednesday the 4th. Post-election, we currently have November 4th to the 6th, looking at operational 24 hours a day, but staffed between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And of course, these hours will be in flux if necessary based on how events unfold. Elements on the board include file sections where there will be weather reports, general information from our other state partners, and information regarding cyber and physical security. There is the GIS map with real-time information from the other topics that I had mentioned, and there are chat functions available for cyber discussions, bad ISP addresses, civil unrest, and general situational awareness between the federal, state, and local partners as previously mentioned. That's all the election cell has to report, unless there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Melissa. One of the things that we did to try to enhance information sharing is we also added a election support page to the current county hub that you all have access to. On that hub right now, we have the knowledge management plan in total, and then we have our critical information requirement, essential elements of information requirements have also been sent out to you already, but that'll be up, is actually already up on the county hub page. And after this is completed, we are recording this right now, and we'll post this probably Friday, but we also post a copy of this presentation as well for you to go through. Next slide, please. As far as reporting, I talked extensively about how this is a timely type situation where we're going to have a lot of counties involved. So it's important for everybody to be on the same sheet of music and understand the knowledge management plan. In WebEOC, the incident name is 2020 election, and in the actual knowledge management plan, it has both incident numbers for WebEOC and for Knowledge Center. We ask, though, that everybody try to submit all your reporting through WebEOC. If for any reason that you cannot submit a situation report through WebEOC and you're using Knowledge Center, be advised that if you submit it as an attachment, that we will not receive it through the normal API channel, that we get it into WebEOC, so that we'll need that to be emailed. If for any reason you have any trouble whatsoever submitting things through WebEOC, please contact Rob Fenn here at the CRCC, and he can assist you with fixing issues with WebEOC. That's our primary. As an alternate, obviously, we can always submit through area office and CCing the SAS inbox here at PEMA. In addition, the most important thing that we have going on here is our critical information requirements and essential elements of information. Melissa alluded to a lot of things that we're focusing on. You also received this. The things that we're focusing on are the counties activated or not activated and the times of that. But more importantly, are there any concerns with polling places? And this can be anything from infrastructure issues, security issues, which include intentional disruptions, cyber attacks, protests and demonstrations that you might know about or hear about, any kind of violence, fires, normal incidents that would impact those locations, anything COVID related that would impact that, any issues with lines at the polling locations, nearby incidents, and then obviously things that Tim talked about earlier, things like that could impact feeding operations in your counties. For critical information requirements and essential elements of information, when you look at this list, they really are based on if it's critical or if it's an essential element of information. It really comes down to the severity of that particular instance. So we ask you to email us immediately upon receipt of any information. That's a critical information requirement. And if it comes in through the HISN dashboard, we can accept it that way as well. But we also ask that you email the SAS01 inbox so we can get that right away. Of course, if this situation is really dire, we accept a phone call as well, but we ask you to follow up with an email as well so we can track this. It's very important that when you report this stuff to us, that you do it in give us the 5 W's, the who, what, where, why, and when, and how, so we get the most details possible so we can affect that situation and make the best decisions possible. As far as daily reporting, if you are running a 24-hour reporting cycle, we are looking to have any kind of situation reports submitted to us, if you can, by 1,800 hours each day, so that we can submit a 2000 sit rep. We're also looking at a 06 in the morning sit rep cycle. That's also part of the cycle that we're on for 24-hour operations when we're doing that. Really, that's all I have at this time. Is Jonathan going to follow up with? You stop out as far as the resource request process?
Just to reinforce the resource request process, so we have already talked about law enforcement resource requests, but the WebEOC resource request process is the process that we do want you to use. So anything that you have that comes up, whether it's law enforcement related or non-law enforcement related, please submit it directly through the WebEOC process. Although the area offices are going to be staffed and they're a branch underneath the RSS, they don't, they're not going to be the ones that adjudicate any resource requests, allocate resource requests, and those types of things. So it'll go in through the WebEOC. We'll bring the area office in as the RSS adjudicates the resource request, and that's how that information flows. Okay. Right. So there again, if you have any questions regarding reporting or the knowledge management plan, you can send your questions to the SAS inbox, and we'll get you answered. So we believe we answered the majority of the questions throughout the brief, but there were one or two that were unique questions, and Director Padfield's going to address any of those.
Sure. So thanks, Tim. There were a couple of questions. One of them actually, and actually all of them were good questions. One of them revolved around the use of 911 and how should 911 centers actually handle calls that come in from polling locations to report civil unrest or other issues like that. And that's really a discussion that really needs to happen at the county level. There's obviously, ways to be able to deal with that, but it goes back to really having good relationships. So, I think understanding those calls, you're probably going to get those, especially if people, are concerned with voter intimidation, if they run across issues like we talked about with people that have actually, firearms and they're open carrying in the area of a polling location. And, I think, working through that with your 911 center is really key, and having that discussion. I think it's, from a prudent perspective, it's probably prudent to be able to make the assumption that everything is valid as it's reported, but, and handling it as such, but also having good connection to your election officials and understanding who the judge of elections happens to be at that site to be able to have that communication and that coordination to find out, is that really a valid request? Is it something that is concerning or something that, may be an interpretation issue by somebody? So I think really the key there is making sure there's good coordination at that level to be able to really deconflict anything that occurs or misinformation that comes in or specific reports that come in regarding a certain situation, a polling location. The other question that we had was, can counties use WIA alerts for emergency changes in polling locations or to polling locations? So that's a rather complex question. And I think the challenge with dealing with that is understanding what the iPause and the WIA alert platform was predominantly designed for. So I think for routine notification of a change in polling location, I think that's a far stretch regarding impacts to public safety or public health that you would use or that would trigger really the use of the WIA messaging system to be able to provide that. However, if there are situations at polling locations that require the closure of a polling location for a specific situation that impacts public safety or could impact public safety, such as a civil unrest event that is actively occurring and is going to trigger a closure of that polling location, and you want to notify the public regarding that so that they are not coming to that polling location and exacerbating that current situation or going to be in harm's way by coming to that polling location. I think that is an appropriate use of a WIA message to be able to alert the public regarding their public safety if they're coming to that, and that is their polling location that they have to go to. As an aside to that, if there happens to be notification of the alternate polling location in that process, I think that would probably be appropriate as well. But I think we need to look at really what the triggering event is in the use of that WIA, and really to make sure, because it is such an invasive notification, we don't want to really, overuse that and actually, have folks that don't listen to those WIA messages when we really need them to listen to those messages. So I think really, having a good plan for that and understanding what the causative factor happens to be, and, if you're using it in support of public safety to be able to limit, public impact or public safety impacts from a civil unrest event that is actively evolving or escalating at a specific polling location, I think that would be an appropriate use of that system. So there are no kind of black and white answers with some of that stuff, but there are a lot of different shades of gray. So, that would be the consideration that I would have. For the folks that have their own public alerting authority, I would strongly suggest that you kind of walk down through that before you actually try to launch a WIA alert. And the other thing is, from a CIR perspective, that would really be something that we would need to know. Even though it is geolocated or geo-targeted, there is some spillage that occurs from that gets outside of that area, and that can create some confusion. So it's really something that we would need to know at our level, that if that system is being utilized, we want to know it so we can kind of anticipate issues. The other challenge with that is, as when we've used that in the past, we've seen 911 call center activity increase because there may be some confusion why that platform is being used, especially if the message is not clear. So they would be some of the considerations I would have at the county level if you're using local alerting authority to be able to initiate those.
Okay. All right, and then lastly, we'll have closing remarks.
So first of all, I'd like to thank all the staff that is around the table here and all the staff that is online that has worked so diligently, not only for the election, but also for everything else that we've been doing, and all our partners that are involved in the election process. That includes, obviously, Department of State, our agency staff, National Guard, Pennsylvania State Police, Governor's Office of Homeland Security, to be able to really bring this together. What is really key, and hopefully that you heard this multiple times tonight, is that, in complex situations, we are going to be faced with things that were unanticipated or interdependencies that were not anticipated. We've seen that with the COVID response. We've seen that with the civil unrest earlier this year. We've seen that with a lot of major complex response operations. The key to be able to handle those operations is to have good processes and procedures in place and good flow of information, both horizontally and vertically, in all the agencies and throughout all the stakeholders, so that we can make good decisions at the time when we're doing crisis action planning. That starts at the local level. That starts at the local municipal level. That starts at the county level. And obviously, we're here as a service to be able to provide, state resources to the folks that need it when they exceed the local capability. So the more you do as an emergency management coordinator to be able to make sure things are coordinated at your level, that you have the contacts that you need, that you're reaching out ahead of time, the easier that makes for our job when it comes to us, because we can check all those boxes that all that coordination has occurred. If it hasn't occurred at that level, then that's where we have to go back and make sure that everything is coordinated and everybody has visibility. That means local law enforcement has visibility, state police that's covering that area has visibility, National Guard has visibility. So, it's really key to have that level of coordination at all levels of government that are dealing with this. I'm sure we will be faced with certain situations that we did not anticipate, but we're all in this together. We've actually, I often say to the staff that there's no one of us is as smart as all of us. And it's really, going to be key to be able to leverage everybody's strengths and to be able to make sure that we're well coordinated to be able to get through probably what is another complex next 2 weeks or maybe potentially longer related to the election. So I appreciate everybody's hard work in doing what they've done up to this point with everything that has occurred in 2020. And I appreciate all the work that you've put into coordinating things at your level regarding elections, election security, to be able to make sure that people have the ability to be able to exercise their constitutional right to be able to vote in an election, and that they have the protections and the mechanisms in place to be able to go do that. So with that, that's all I have, Tim.
All right, thank you very much, Director, and folks, thank you very much for coming on the call. As Mike Manley had mentioned, this is a recorded session, so the recording will be uploaded to the Hub sometime later this week, and continue to look at the Hub for additional information that we end up posting. Thank you very much, and have a great night.